Here's me planning an idea in your head. I say to you, don't think about elephants. What are you thinking about?
Elephants.
Right, but it's not your idea because you know I gave it to you. The subject's mind can always trace the genesis of the idea. True inspiration's impossible to fake.
It's not true.
The opening of 2001: A Space Odyssey features arguably one of the most famous editing moments of all time. A match cut from an airborne bone to a satellite orbiting around Earth. It is a thought-provoking moment, encapsulating humanity's drive for power through technological development in a single cut. Much of the research into editing has centered around the way editors shape the emotional journey of a spectator. However, this well-known moment in 2001 is not an emotional moment. It is a conceptual one. For my exegesis, I want to better understand the way editors can communicate ideas to their audience. How can editing techniques be used to encourage audiences to think?
Montage means the assembly of pieces of film, which, moved in rapid succession before the eye, create an idea. Now we have a close-up. Let me show what he sees. Let's assume he saw a woman holding a baby in her arms. Now we cut back to his reaction to what he sees, and he smiles. Now what is he as a character? He's a kindly man. He's sympathetic. Now, let's take the middle piece of film away, the woman with the child, but leave his two pieces of film as they were. Now we'll put in a piece of film of a girl in a bikini. He looks, girl in a bikini, he smiles. What is he now? The dirty old man.
Hitchcock is describing the Kuleshov effect. First observed by Lev Kuleshov, the effect refers to when our perception of a shot is influenced by the shot which came before it. Rather than considering each image independently, the viewer has to infer the relationship between the images, creating an overall effect which is greater than the sum of its parts. For example, at the end of The Godfather, shots of Michael Corleone at a baptism are intercut with the murders of the Italian mafia leaders. By relating the images together, the audience can infer that Michael has ordered these killings, without having to actually see him do so. This can often be a more impactful way of revealing information to an audience. They go through the process of realization themselves, rather than just seeing everything that happens in the film explicitly. While this is a fascinating technique in its own right, I am more interested in how editors can communicate conceptual ideas, rather than plot information. Here we turn to the intellectual montages of Soviet filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein, who juxtaposed images in order to generate political messages. In summarizing Eisenstein's theories of collisional montage, Louis Giannetti says, editing ought to be dialectical. The conflict of two shots, thesis and antithesis, produces a wholly new idea, synthesis. For example, at the end of his first film Strike, when the workers are being shot down by soldiers, he intercuts it with the slaughter of cows, to give an idea of the systematic, brutal way in which the workers were killed. Of course, films are not just made up of two shots, but an entire system of shot relations, or an assemblage. Developed by Giles Deleuze and Felix Guattari, an assemblage is a dynamic network of relations, a system of independent linkages in constant flux. Assemblages are everywhere. They can be anything from a machine to an organism to a cultural group. A film is also an assemblage, a structure of relations in flux. Pixels dancing around each other, mise-en-scène talking amongst itself, and shots linked together counterintuitively by a cut. It is the role of the editor to build the assemblage of a film, organizing the rushes into a structure which makes meaningful sense. Film editor Walter Murch talks about how this process is almost autonomous for him. The shots themselves seem to create each other. This shot makes the next shot, which makes the next shot, etc. As editors respond to the rushes and assemble the shots, they build a network of Kuleshovian relations. Over the course of an entire film, complicated conceptual ideas can begin to synthesize in the mind of the viewer, culminating in the film's final shot. Experimental documentary films serve as the ultimate exemplar of this idea of assemblage, precisely because they do not use narrative as a structural device, but instead depend purely on the relationships between shots. Berlin's Symphony of a Great City, for example, stitches together documentary footage from all parts of Berlin life, building up a dynamic picture of the city. The video essay film Sans Soleil poetically brings together observational footage from all around the world, as a voiceover ruminates on the nature of cinema and globalization. Using time-lapses and slow motion, conceptual film Koyaanisqatsi juxtaposes images of nature and modernity in order to make a critique of humanity's relationship to the environment. In each of these three films, the material has been assembled by the editor to represent a particular conceptual understanding of the worlds they explore. Going forward in my research, a close analysis of these films will be essential in understanding how editors can practically communicate theoretical ideas to audiences. In tandem with this, I'm developing an exegesis film in which I plan to use everyday observational footage to produce a conceptual argument about the world. This will also give me an opportunity to experiment with more unconventional forms of assemblage, such as split screen, superimposition, freeze frames, time lapses, and slow motion. What kind of Kulashovian relations are generated by each of these techniques? And of course, music and sound are a whole other area to explore, with Andreas Baranowski and Heiko Hecht observing a sound equivalent for the Kuleshov effect. This research will no doubt be useful for my capstone projects. My capstone drama, Winter Solstice, plans to use longer takes to establish a sense of naturalistic time. This might mean having to shorten scenes, or even cutting sections out in order to save time. This research into audience cognition will allow me to make informed decisions about the kind of narrative inferences audiences are able to make, particularly when there are gaps in the story. In fact, this kind of elliptical editing may even work to engage the viewer further. My capstone documentary, We're Not Heard, plans to use satirical montage to break up the more conventional obdoc sequences. Assembling the right images in an appropriate order will be essential in communicating the political concepts to the audience. This is even more important in a documentary, where the story is often completely created in the edit. To wrap up, I want to answer a question. Why would you want to use film to communicate concepts when we already have language? Wouldn't it be easier to just say the ideas? My answer is that films give viewers the opportunity to experience those ideas for themselves, leaving a much longer lasting impression than an idea that was explicitly given to them. It would be impossible to try and turn film into a language. Every audience member experiences the film in a different way, but editors, in their careful deployment of assemblage, can create a fertile space for the production of ideas.